saw a statistic that stated that 70% of Christian young men struggle with pornography. Or they didn't say struggle with pornography, they view pornography. Okay, so there's a difference. There's a difference between, see, only Christians, only true men struggle with pornography. The rest just give into it, right? So what surprised me about the statistic was not the fact that 70% are viewing pornography. The fact is, it was the fact that 70% are willing to just outright say, they view pornography, and they didn't really seem to have a problem with that. And we're talking about Christian young men here. And so the issue, the heart of the matter was, do these young men really know what they're doing? Do they realize the gravity and the implications of what they are doing? And, I think it's important that we first discuss that when we're discussing this topic. It's not really a topic I wanted to discuss. It's not really a pleasant topic, but I think it's important since it's affecting 70% of young men. That's the 70% that were willing to admit to it. The other 30%, I guarantee you, 99.9% of them, maybe there's an exception, they all struggle with lust in one form or another, or they just aren't willing to admit that they are viewing pornography. And so I think it's very, very important that we establish in our own minds the desperate seriousness of what this really is. Because when you live in a world that's absolutely full of pornography and all manner of sexual perversions, okay? When you live in a world that's absolutely full of it, it becomes easy to become complacent because everybody's doing it, everybody struggles with it. And I think it's good to remember that you're not alone in your struggle, but that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it any less of an abomination in the eyes of God. And so, I think that it's important that we first establish, why is it wrong? What's the big deal about it? Because, obviously it's wrong. We all know it's wrong. But why is it wrong? What's the problem with it? Well, here's the problem with it. When you view an image, all right, and you use that, and that it's an image of a person, okay, and you use that for your own pleasure, okay, you have taken the humanity of that person, reduced it to an image. Okay, so you took a person who was made in the image of God, reduced it to an image for the enjoyment of man. And let me tell you something, that's murder. That is not just sexual immorality. That is murder. And here's why. When you kill someone, you take a living, breathing human and you reduce it to a body. There's no difference between that and what you do in pornography, where you take a living, breathing person made in the image of God and make it into a lifeless image. Because by nature, you can't view that person as a person, because a person requires a relationship. In order to see someone as a person, it requires that you sacrificially, you sacrifice something in order to have a relationship. That's why selfish people really don't see other people as people. They just see them as objects to gain, for their own gain, for their own personal benefit. They don't care about other people in a deep and personal way. Now, obviously, that's wrong, right? And when you put it as murder, maybe it seems a little bit more wrong. So you have the moral reason why it's wrong, okay? But what about the implications for the young man who allows himself to view pornography or struggles with pornography, or however you want to word this? What are the implications for that man? Well, the essence of it is this. You may think that you can compartmentalize this. You may think that over here you view pornography, okay, in behind closed doors in your bedroom, okay, you view pornography, but you don't do. But the rest of your life, you don't struggle with that, right? Because the rest of your life, you're just living as a normal person. Is that right? Do you really believe that's right? Because I don't believe that's right. Because as you view others, and you don't view them as people, okay, you can't just do that to some people. It's going to slowly start invading your entire thought life, and it's going to slowly start changing how you view others around you, and it's slowly going to crush you and make you into a monster who desires nothing but to use others for his own purposes. And it will absolutely destroy your relationships, and it absolutely strikes at the heart of who you are as a man. I don't believe there's any sin that is so serious that strikes at manhood, at biblical manhood, in the same way that lust strikes at biblical manhood, because it destroys the very essence of what men were made to do. What were men made to do? Well, let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, God created man, and he gave him a wife. That was literally the first thing that God gave to man. Well, he gave him the garden, but he gave him a wife. And what did he give him? Did he give him this wife to serve him? Did he give him the wife to be his personal slave? No, he didn't do that. He gave it to him as a helpmate. In other words, he gave her to him so that he could sacrificially love her, and she could sacrificially love him. Okay, and it was a relationship, and he was given the role of loving, serving, and protecting his wife. Okay, and so when you view pornography, you basically shake your fist in the face of God. You say, no, that's not the route I'm going to go. I am going to go my own route. I am going to view this person as an image, right? And I'm going to take the relationship element out of it for my own pleasure, for my own satisfaction. So that's the issue. That's why lust is so serious. It's why pornography is so serious. And the simple fact of the matter is, it doesn't necessarily have to even be pornography in order for it to be destructive in this manner. You know, I thank God that he kept me from falling into the habit, or into viewing pornography. Like, I've never used a pornographic website, but there's still plenty of issues. There's still plenty of opportunities to have lustful thoughts in a culture that's absolutely saturated with lustful images, lustful music, you can't escape it. And so you have to have something besides mere willpower and something besides mere avoidance in order to overcome this problem of lust. Because I want to move on from what the issue is, because I think a lot of you know what the issue is. I think a lot of you realize that this is wrong. You realize that this is a problem, and you're scared. You're scared because you want to stop, but you can't stop. And it's not like drugs or alcohol, because it's not like it's something outside of you. It's inside your head, because, like I said, it's not just viewing pornography. It's not just seeing images. Though, again, you don't have to go very far to see something that's not right. It's in your head. You can't escape it. You can go to bed, and you can close your eyes, and it can pop up there. You can run into the woods where there's nobody for miles. And you can throw your phone into the river, and you can have nothing, and it can still be in your head. And so what is the solution? Well, how do we escape this horrible trap? Because it is, and I understand where I've gotten to places that I did not want to be, and it's a dark place, and I understand that. But there's hope, because we serve a great God, and here's what helped me the most in this issue. See, I came to a point where I really was struggling to view others in the right manner, and the first thing I had to do, and the reason was because I was struggling with lust. All right, and the first thing I had to do was I had to first admit it, right? Because this is something that's really hard to admit. Because, again, it strikes at the very heart of who we are as men, and we don't want to admit it. We want to minimize our sin. The thing is, you have to own your sin fully and 100%. Admit that it's wrong. Admit that it's murder. Admit that you are in active rebellion against God. Again, if you're a Christian who's viewing pornography, you are in active rebellion against God. And God takes that very seriously. God takes it. You have outraged the Spirit. You are crucifying Christ once again, and you've got to stop. You can't, because if you continue down that path, I would question whether you are a believer. You have to gain control of yourself. But the thing is, you can't do it on your own. So the first thing is you have to recognize your sin for what it is. Okay, then you have to lay that before God. You have to repent of that sin. But more than that, the root issue, I think, of lust in most cases is not the sin of lust. The root issue is the fact that you are not living for Christ. Your sole purpose in life is for yourself. Because lust really revolves around selfishness, okay? It really is, at its root, selfishness, okay? So you first have to lay down your life. You have to give it all up, every aspect of your life, and not just your thought life, not just lust, not just whatever you think you need to give up. No, you need to give up every single aspect of your life and hand it over to Christ. Give it all over to Christ and live for nothing except for a calling. Nothing but what God calls you to do. Give it all up. Be willing to do whatever God calls you to do. And start in a practical way, right? You don't just like say, I'll go to Africa and become a missionary. No, God doesn't call most people to go to Africa and become missionaries. You've got to start in a practical way. And a good first step would be to start exercising self-control. And I get it. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's a slow process, a slow healing process, and you've got to have patience and endurance in doing that. And when you fall down, you've got to pick yourself back up by the grace of God. Again, you can't do this on your own strength. You can only do this by God's grace, relying fully on His grace. Okay, so first you got to admit to yourself. You got to confess it to God. You got to turn, repent, and you got to give your life fully and 100% over to Christ. Okay, that's the first step. Okay, and you see, when I did that, when I truly did that, I was struggling with this as a born again believer. So it's not like I could just go have a salvation experience. First of all, I don't really believe in salvation experiences, but I couldn't just go have a salvation experience and then everything was magically better, because first of all, that's not how it works. Second of all, I was a born again baptized believer, and so I couldn't understand why I was struggling with this so much. But the thing was, I wasn't living with my all for Christ. Every aspect of your life has to change, okay? Every aspect. And what God gave me was He gave me a hatred for my sin. You've got to learn to hate your sin. And again, when I say you have to, you can't do this apart from God's grace. You've got to cry out to God to give you a hatred for sin, for lust, for the underlying sins that are causing your lust, for the selfishness, for the greed. Start practicing acts of love for others, acts of kindness for others, because hate isn't enough. You can't just have a hate for your sin, because hate is a weak emotion. I'll tell you what's a strong emotion. Love. Love is a strong emotion. You need a hate for your sin, but you need a far greater love for the people who are around you, for the people made in the image of God. Because when you love people, you don't kill them. When you love people, you don't use them for your own advantage. You seek to serve people. You seek to love your neighbor as yourself. It's truly an act of laying yourself down in service. And that's why this is a practical step. It's not just like an emotional experience where you say, I'm sorry, God. You say, no, God, I hate my sin, and I deserve your condemnation. But by the grace of your Son, and appealing to the grace of your Son, I want a second chance at life. Would you give me a second chance to live for you? I want to lay down my life. I want to say no more living for Caleb. No more living for whatever your name is. No more living for that person. That person's dead. That person died at the cross. I'm living for Christ. Okay? But remember that it's not gonna be an immediate change. This is gonna be a battle, and it's gonna be an uphill battle. And you're gonna have to battle this for the rest of your life. I'm not saying that, I've struggled with this in the past. I don't struggle with that in the same way that I used to. Okay, I've experienced much relief in this area, but you're going to struggle with it. And there's going to be times when you don't struggle with it. There's going to be times when you struggle with it a lot. And you're going to have to, every time you fall down, you got to pick yourself back up again. You can't beat yourself up over your mistakes. You can't, think of yourself as a terrible person because you've fallen again. And so then just allow yourself to beat yourself up. No, that doesn't help. You've got to pick yourself up every time that you fall. You got to rely on the grace of God and say, God, I'm sorry. I failed you, and I wasn't serving you in the way that you have called me to serve you. Okay, and then you need to turn. Okay, and you need to ask God to show you where the sin is in your life that's causing you to fail, and you've got to pick yourself back up. And every time or by God's grace, again, I keep on saying, pick yourself back up. You can't pick yourself back up, but by God's strength, you can. So again, I think that's key. So let's recap, because I feel like I'm rambling here just a little bit. First, acknowledge your sin. Admit it to yourself. Confess it to God. turn away from it. Give your life over to Christ, okay? And every time you fall, every time you fail, recognize that you're not going to be perfect this side of heaven. But it's an upward, it's direction, not perfection, right? You should see growth. If you don't see growth, there's probably sin in your life that you are not yet willing to give over to Christ, to give up, okay? You need to recognize that, to get rid of that, okay? Recognizing that, yes, you will sin, yes, you will fail. And when you fail, when you fall, you've got to get right back up again. You got to repent right away and get back up again. And not beating yourself up, not leaving any time to give into self-recrimination, because that's pride. That's not humility. A lot of people think that it's humble to beat yourself up, to think that you're I don't know, call yourself names in your head. I don't know what you do. Maybe physically beat yourself up. I don't know. Don't do that. But what they think is that's humility. That's not humility. That's pride, because I'm the one who's embarrassed. When I have true humility, all I think about is how I failed my God, how I failed my Savior. That's what I'm worried about. But a false humility, that's actually pride, says I failed and I messed up, and what are people going to think of me? Okay, so that's important to remember. Okay, the next thing you need to do, okay, and this is something that I did not do for a lot of years. Okay, and I really regret that I didn't do it. You've got to confess to somebody. You've got to tell somebody what's going on, because I struggled alone for a lot of years. And God did give me miraculous relief from the sin of lust, okay? God, I don't know how or why he did it to me, because it wouldn't have worked in most circumstances. If you aren't willing to tell someone else your struggles, if you aren't willing to be vulnerable, okay, and tell someone, hey, I'm really struggling with lust, or hey, I do view pornography sometimes. Okay, so that's an important point, because at the outset I said I was a little bit upset that these Christian young men were just outright admitting that they were viewing pornography. Look, it's okay to recognize that you've failed. Okay, and when you make a turnaround in your life by God's grace, it's not going to be overnight, and you're still going to fail. All right, that's okay. What I was talking about there was the people who view pornography. They don't see it as a problem. They think that they can just have this little issue over here in their life, and then the rest of their life is fine. I was trying to stress what the issue really is, and how serious of an issue this is. But the thing is, there's going to come a point where you've got to come to somebody and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and I've tried everything, and I just can't seem to overcome this. But here's what this will do for you, okay? Here's what coming to someone else and telling them your struggle is going to do for them. Again, you have to trust this person. You can't just go to just anybody, otherwise you could receive some really hard emotional scars from that. You gotta go to somebody, because what lust does. Okay, so when we take someone and we make them into an image, take them from an image made in the image of God, or from a person made in the image of God, and make them into an image for the enjoyment of man, when we do that, we are taking the humanity out of that person. Again, I've already said that. But when we do that, we start to ruin our other relationships. Do you see where I'm going with this? That's why lust is so isolating. Because you're literally ruining your relationships by doing it. And so how can you come to somebody and tell them that you're doing this when doing this literally is ruining your relationships? At least that's how it was in my head. And I was scared of what other people would think of me. And I was scared that they would, I wanted to keep it over here. I wanted to keep it hidden and keep it, and keep it away from other people. And to get back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, I had experienced a remarkable amount of healing and a remarkable amount of relief from this. But it still had control over me, because I was scared of what other people would think of me. I thought, if somebody finds this out, they're going to think I was a terrible person. And and I'm not going to be the same, I'm not going to have that same effectiveness, maybe I won't have the same effectiveness for Christ, or my testimony would be absolutely ruined, because I struggled with lust, because I struggled with impure thoughts, and I was scared of what people would think of me. Well, that held me. So while, yes, I had experienced a lot of healing, I was still held captive by that fear. So what you've got to do is you've got to tell somebody. Parents are pretty awesome for that. Maybe you'd be surprised. Most young men struggle with lust. And while you should be careful, because you don't want to encourage one another in your sin, you can find a lot of healing in acknowledging that, yeah, I struggle with this. And then they might be able to find a whole lot of healing, because they feel like now they can admit to you that, yeah, they struggle with this too. And, I feel like since I've been able to acknowledge and to confess and to admit to people that, yeah, I've struggled with lust in the past, I've had a far greater testimony for Christ. I've had I've just grown leaps and bounds, and I don't say that in a prideful sense. I don't understand it myself. It's all by God's grace. But I've grown leaps and bounds in my Christian faith, in my walk with Christ, and as a Christian man, I've grown in ways that I could have never grown unless I had come out and admitted that this is what I did. But that's not who I am anymore. And you can judge me, and you can put me on the naughty list. You can judge me, but you can't condemn me, because I've stood before the court of heaven and I stood condemned. But God looked at me and he said, "No, that's my son," and he gave me a second chance at life. And he can do that for you as well. You've got to. But it starts with acknowledging your sin, turning away from that sin and turning to God, begging God for forgiveness, because it is a serious sin. You can't just come back in a, la-di-da manner thinking that, oh, Christ will forgive me. It's a serious sin. Christ can forgive you. The blood of Christ is sufficient. But what you have done is a serious wrong, and you have to recognize that. And the next thing you got to do is you've got to lay down your life completely, 100%, fully. Absolutely refuse to live for yourself anymore. And you've got to live for Christ and no one but Christ. Only what is done for Christ will last. It's good advice for whether you struggle with lust or you don't struggle with lust. Just saying. Then you've got to learn to have a hatred for sin. You got to hate your sin. Why? Not because it makes you look bad. Not because of what it does to you. You could hate it for that reason as well. But you've got to, the real deep reason behind it is because of what it does to the name of Christ, of what it does to your God, to your Savior. That's why you've got to hate it. You've got to hate what God hates. But that's not enough, because hate is a weak emotion. You've got to learn to love. You got to learn to love the people that God has put into your life in practical ways, in your not just like in your thoughts, not just feelings, in practical ways. Learn to serve other people. Learn to just be intentional about your relationships. Don't view people as objects. There's so many different ways that you can view people as objects. It's not just pornography. It could be if you only see people as a way of getting what you want. You're viewing people as objects. Don't view people as objects. Learn to serve other people. Love other people. You can only do that by God's grace. That's why you have to do it in this order. If you do it out of order, you're trying to do it on your own strength. It's not going to work. And that's really what you got to do. And the final step is you've got to go and you've got to be honest with others. Because the thing is, people can't blackmail you with something that everybody already knows. And the thing is, what you've done is bad, but it's not like at least 70% of the rest of the world hasn't done it. I mean, of the Christian men haven't done it. Like, it's terrible. Don't get me wrong. But again, I don't think it's something to hide. It's not something to keep hidden and, behind closed doors. And it's not about the gravity of the sin. If I told you all the details of my sin, which I'm not going to, because everybody tells their testimony and then they make it about the sin, and it's like, if it's a bigger sin, then your testimony is better. Well, if it's, if I told you my sin, you might say that it wasn't such a big deal. It is. Every sin is an offense against God, and especially as a Christian, it's double an offense against God. Okay, it's not about the level of the sin. It's about what you do about it, right? And it's so freeing to be able to admit, yeah, I've struggled with this, but that's not who I am anymore. because I gave it over to Christ, and he changed me, radically transformed me, and I don't live for myself anymore, and I love people. Absolutely love people. That's, when you see it on my shirt, when you see, on the channel banner, love, serve, protect, it's not an empty phrase for me. That's what I live for. That's what God gave me. He said, here, I gave him my sin, and that's what he gave me instead. And that's what he can give you as well. So I want you to be encouraged. I want you to see that there is hope. I want you, but at the same time, I hope that God puts the fear of him in your heart, that you tremble at the thought of just staying where you're at, because that is the one thing that will be the most destructive, the most damning to your manhood. And I don't use that word lightly. I don't use that word. I'm not just swearing there. I literally mean damning to your manhood. And that's. I hope it helped. This was not an easy video for me to make. It's hard to admit to these kind of things, to admit that you've struggled with this kind of thing, and it's going to be hard for you as well if you're willing to take the challenge. But I dare you to do it. So I hope it helped. I am Caleb with Nebraska Farm Boy. Hope to see you back next time as we continue on. Actually, this isn't a series. I was going to say as we continue on this series, and I don't know. It was actually a standalone video. So, hopefully we'll see you next time.